Hi guys, this is the Definite Article here for Grinder School. I'm here today with two tables of 50NL Zoom. We may add a third as the session goes on, depending on how it goes. So I don't think there's going to be any overarching theme to the session. I'm just going to really talk about what arises in the play. I think it's probably good to lead this turn. I don't think our opponent's checking back the flop with a queen or 10 very often. And I think he calls the turn with a lot of draws, so I think betting a river is probably going to be profitable. Here, we're flushing in the small blind despite the fish in the big blind, the short stack fish in the big blind, because we're going to be very happy to call a shove. Although I'd advocate not having a flushing range in the small blind, especially against the button, but normally against a cut-off as well, I think it's absolutely fine against middle position, because the fact that they opened in middle position gives you a decent amount of protection against being squeezed, because naturally their range is stronger, so they should face a squeeze significantly less often, because value ranges are narrower. So, yeah, I've had a pretty decent few days. Just today, unfortunately, it wasn't a win, but I managed to come about 500. It doesn't sound very impressive, but there were 40,000 hands there. There were 40,000 players in the tournament. In the Micro Million Sunday Storm, that was only good for $100, but it's not too bad for an $11 buy-in anyway. And yeah, I'm up about 500 at the tables the last 2 days, which I'm very pleased with, especially at 50NL. I mean, so here Ace King is a pretty standard 3-bet, and I think it's likely this against an unknown who's probably a fish, we can exploitatively c-bet our entire range, which isn't a pair plus on this flop. I think if we were to develop, if we were playing against a competent reg who was observing our frequencies, King Queen offsuit in that particular spot, particularly without a diamond, would be a hand we'd quite like to check, because it doesn't have great equity against the calling range. It has okay-ish showdown value. We can sometimes check the showdown and win, so that adds EV to a check fold line. And well, it doesn't really block anything relevant either. On table 1, the flop check call seems fairly standard, but I think it's just a spot where you probably have to fold the turn. I don't see any other real possibility. So the question I want to ask you guys is whether you'd like to see anything in particular in the theory series I'm doing. I think the first part should be out by now on pre-flop raising, and I do have a second and possibly third part coming on constructing 3-betting ranges. We're opening 100% in the small blind against this guy in the big blind because he's folding to a ridiculous amount of steals. But from there with theory, there's just so much I'm not really sure where to go. I could probably do a 100-part series if I cared to, and there are some things I know I definitely want to talk about at some stage, just because I think they're super fun, or they're super useful. So I'm probably going to do a short on shared defense responsibility after covering basic defense and basic balanced ranges in an initial video. Queen 10 suited is pretty borderline there, by the way. I can't fault you for calling it as defaults. But also I want to cover some really fun stuff, or stuff that I think is really fun, like toy gaming. And in case you don't know what that is, basically it's where you take a particular spot, you make assumptions about ranges, and you find an equilibrium. I think this is possibly a spot where we should develop a range for calling 4 bets out of position. And I think this is a pretty decent hand to include in it. It's suited, it plays well post-flop, and it's certainly strong enough such that if we are developing a range for flatting 4 bets out of position, we're probably going to need to protect it with some of our nutted hands. So we're probably going to need to defend a little bit more often than perhaps you would otherwise think against 4-bets. The reason being that that's when we take this line, all of his bluffs now gain EV when against our continuance range. Interestingly, I think this is a turn card on which we should probably check our range, check raising some of the stronger hands, and check calling a lot as well. The reason being that we expect him to check back a lot of 9x, and so because his check back narrows his range more than our flop check, his range is stronger on this turn card than ours. Now, I think this is probably a river call. It's just the top of our range. I don't think we can do anything about it, but we do expect to be behind a decent percentage of the time. I mean, against a pot size bet, he doesn't rep a whole lot, but I think we should probably just fold. So yeah, I think I was about to, or maybe I just did explain toy gaming. I think I'd got to talking a bit about making some certain assumptions. So, for instance, I posted on the Grinder School forum. It will be a few weeks ago by now. A river spots in which there was perfect polarization, which makes it a lot easier to calculate ranges. And in case I haven't posted it yet, I may actually do a podcast on this. On getting to the solution. The idea was that some of the opponent's bluffs, some of the best's bluffs in that particular situation, that he could possibly have blocked to call his entire folding range, thus making those bluffs minus EV. And so showing that what would otherwise be prima facie a balanced strategy, a balanced or Nash equilibrium strategy, could not be because it didn't satisfy the basic necessity of neither player being able to unilaterally alter their strategy to increase their expectation. And if that doesn't make sense at the moment, it's going to make more sense when I actually end up doing my theory series in full. Because although you might think, oh, I'm playing the microstakes, what do I need to know about game theory? I think it's something which is considerably underrated. I think that should have probably been a flop call. It's high enough in our range, and especially against that size C-bet. It allows you to more effectively develop exploitative strategies. You can identify a particular start very easily where villain is playing exploitably. So, for instance, this 70% fold in the big blind to a small blind steal is ridiculously exploitable. So we're just going to open really wide, although I'd be opening King 5 suited in a small blind anyway. He's folding too much to C-bets, but not ridiculously so I still think King 5 suited on this particular board is probably a check fold. This is an interesting spot when he checks back the flop. We do have some Jack X for checking the flop, so this isn't the very top of our range. I do expect him to bet all his Jack X and better, so I think this is probably a bet for value. Though there could be an argument for checking, in that if we do bet this, we're going to have to call down with all our weak tens, which isn't great. But I think the argument for betting in that we can get a whole load of value from draws, worst made hands, is much stronger than that. We miss too much EV to use that hand for we miss too much EV by checking that hand to put it in a checking range for protection purposes. So we open ace queen under the gun, get cold called by a fish on the button, and basically that's a flop which smashes his range ridiculously hard. I expect him to have some suited broadways which don't have much on there, but we're ahead of those, and he's often going to check them back. I expect him to have sets, a lot of two pair, a lot of draws, a lot of one pair, which is not folding. So I think ace queen is probably just a check fold there, and to be honest, against the fish we can probably develop an exploitative strategy on that flop of betting only strong draws and made hands. This guy opens 5x from every position, but doesn't fold all that much to 3 bets. So I think the correct exploitative strategy against that is to drastically widen one's getting it in range. I mean, I think certainly when he opens in the cutoff, you can stack 10s plus and ace queen plus, which you couldn't against someone else normally. So yeah, whenever you see somebody do something unusual, I think it's always good, both for practice and for future encounters with them, to consider why it might be exploitable and how you'd go about exploiting it. It's generally good practice. Kings, I'm pretty confident is a 4-bet call here. We're not delighted if we do get 5-bet, but such is life. I mean, to be honest, I don't expect people to be shoving queens here if they're good, but I think a lot of people will make over aggressive shoves there, and I think a lot of people are also going to correctly assume that we don't have a real bluffing range there, at least at 50 NL. Here we're getting about 3 to 1 on the call. We've got a decent implied odds, so it's good to peel. I mean, when he shoves the turn, it's just an easy fold, but we expect to make money on the call in the long run, right? Even if we just see a turn card, we're getting 3 to 1 immediate odds. If we've got 9 outs once, he's 3-betting quite a bit. Small blind as a re-steal, so a cold 4-bet is good here. Sorry, where was I? Okay, this guy's range is incredibly strong here. That said, I think this is probably a C-bet anyway with the backdoor flush draw. Okay, yeah. So we've got 9 outs once, which is pretty strong in itself, and I think we should just shove this turn because he can fold queens, jacks sometimes, and obviously we block nut flushes, which is a decent portion of his range. We have some equity one behind too, although obviously when he does turn a set, we're not getting him off anything. Here, I must admit to not actually remembering the flop action. I think we were 3-way, and based on the size of the pot, somebody bet the flop, so I think that's enough to make it a fold, because our range after calling the flop 3-way should be pretty strong. But it's probably close. I think ace-10 is a call. We get squeezed. I mean, it's bigger than usual, but I think 10s is just too high up in our range to fold with the fish yet to act. I think calling is better than 4-betting. And when we flop top sets and he checks, we have a couple of options. We can either bet and just hope he's taking some wacky line, or I personally prefer checking back, because I think a lot of what he does check to protect his checking range there, or he does check because he thinks he's only got showdown value there, is 10x, and obviously we struggle against that. When he checks the river, I mean, I think he has ace king a decent portion of the time. I think he's quite likely to call any sizing if if he has ace-king without a club, because obviously then he doesn't block out flush draws. That said, I think 50NL people fold probably correctly a little bit exploitably against overbets, so I think a more standard sizing is probably better. I'm still not sure if I should be betting the flop there, by the way. I think it's probably a spot where a check back is fine, but I'm not sure if it's... Actually, that's a really weird squeeze. I'm going to take a note on that. But I'm not sure if it's actually better than betting. Okay, so when this guy checks back the turn, I expect him to barrel a lot of his draws. That said, I think a hand is a little bit too strong to bluff, to use as a bluff. We certainly win at showdown sometimes. And ace-3, we're just going to check down and expect to win a decent portion of the time. Oh, yeah, you might notice I've made a new HUD, which I'm pretty pleased with. I've just got used to it now, so that's why I haven't been recording any live play videos for a while. But it's fairly detailed. It tells me all the essential things I need to know. And just to briefly explain it, this can be a check back as well, but I think with a backdoor flush draw at 50, people aren't defending appropriately against c-bets, especially out of position, so I think we can just get away with betting a lot. When he check raises, I mean, he's folded 80% c-bets so far, so I just expect him to have the nuts, like always. So yeah, this HUD, this is fairly standard top row, VPIP, PFR, 3-bet and 43 bets. The second row is raise first in by position. Third row is hands, then squeeze, fold to squeeze, 4-bet, fold to 4-bet. I mean, I'm tempted to call this river, but I think we have some ace-x in our range to defend. Well, we simply do. That's just a fact. I also don't think he's bluffing misdraws as often as he should be. We obviously block a lot of them with the Queen of Hearts. I don't think he's going to be bluffing with the Jack of Hearts because obviously he has second pair if he has that. So yeah, I think it's just a fold. Without the Queen of Hearts, it's much closer. This guy is over an admittedly limited sample is c-betting far too much. So that leads me to two conclusions. Firstly, we can exploit him by check raising lots. And secondly, we can exploit him by betting a lot when he doesn't see bets, because I think it's going to be a fairly common factor of people who do have a very high flop c-bet percentage, that when they check, they very rarely have the better end of their showdown value hands. Despite our gut shot, I think this is just a fold on the turn. It's close, but I'm not sure how much implied odds we have against a half-pot better. And also, I don't think we have much chance to bluff when we miss on such a dry board. So this guy checks back the flop. He's c-betting a fairly reasonable percentage, so he could certainly have some 10x in his flop check back range. Also, we lose to 9s, 8s, although those should probably be c-bets, and stronger 7x. So both for that reason and the idea that he doesn't really call with much worse than a 7 here very often. Well, ace high he probably calls with a lot of turn bets and draws, but also for the reason that we like to have some hands in our turn checking range that can call twice. We are going to check call this turn, and we're going to check call this river. I mean, he probably knows he doesn't rep a whole lot here. He reps checks back 10x, stronger 7x possibly. But I do have this note which says he bluffs without considering his perceived range, and that's kind of unfortunate. I think the turn is a very standard check back in his spot, but that's not really a big issue. So yeah, I think he's going to be pretty bluff heavy on that river. Because the corollary of him having of him checking back a lot of showdown value hands is that he also checks back a lot of no showdown value hands, because somebody who does see bet 55% is certainly not bluffing all their air on the flop, and thus when they do check back they have some air on the turn which they can turn into a bluff. I mean, he probably has a gut shot or something when it is there, but certainly there's enough of that in their range, as well as all the turn draws, that we simply think he's going to be incredibly bluff heavy in that spot. What's our read on this guy? Yeah, okay, he's not good. I mean, when he overbets his flop, I mean, I don't think there's really any merit to raising. Well, there wouldn't be against any sizing, but we desperately want to try and keep this guy in the pot, and yeah. Obviously, that's a pretty nice hand to have, and I've had 3 or 4 of those over the last couple of days, so hence the amount of profit. So I think I'm going to 3-bet here. This guy's fishy, but he has shown himself to be capable of folding to 3-bets. We have decent blockers. He seems positionally unaware to a degree, but on this flop we just need to check fold. We have no equity. It hits his calling range pretty hard, and it's just a fairly obvious spot to give up. I mean, I take a note on people min-raising a small blind, firstly because I think that they're probably doing it with a weird part of their range. Normally I'd be tempted to float this flop, but he's only c-bet 1 out of 7 opportunities so far, so I'm just going to give up there. I mean, again, I'm tempted to bluff the river when he calls a turn, and we do have the bottom of our range, but I think there are significantly less draws here, which didn't at least pick up a pair on the river, so wow, okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously he's not folding that. We're calling this A because he seems kind of bad, and B because he's a fish in a big blind, and C because it's a min-raise. We're a little concerned about the pot size bet on the flop, but we can't fold top pair, top kicker. And when he bets the river, I expect him to have a small overpair that he's not folding to a raise a lot of the time. I don't expect him to be bluffing often, if at all. I think he's going to rarely donk small with top pair, so I think we can raise this for value / protection. He probably has some gut shots, some open-ended straight draws, so obviously we block a lot of them with our 9s. And that's really an awful river card for that reason, because basically everything except for 6-8 got there. I mean, getting 8-1, I don't think he has, he can't really bet call complete error on his flop. So I think we're hoping he has 7x or 3x, and I don't think he has, so that's more than 10% of the time, which makes this a fold. So this guy calls from the big blind. He's not doing that very wide, but he is folding a decent amount to c-bets, about 48% of the time, which is a little bit high. So I think this might be a c-bet anyway, because we can turn some straight draws. We can obviously we have 2 overcards and not much showdown value, but I think that makes it even more so. The 3-bet's probably a little bit small there. I didn't really clock that we were a little deep effective between the 2 of us. So yeah, I'm interested in what you guys think of the live play format. I realise that you must have seen a lot of live play videos over the years from Gazelic, from Pocket Air, from Caritas, from Colossus, from Killzades, but I don't think you'd have seen much Zoom. E- e- either either because the um, instructors in question are US players, or because they mostly play reg tables, which to be honest is probably a good idea. In all honesty, I think for any decent player, playing Zoom is elite, just because the games are the games are actually significantly tougher than reg tables at the same limit. I tend to find. I mean, this is just a fold, a knit flats middle position against under the gun and then back raises. I mean, he can have kings even. Some people flat their entire range in that spot. Uh, so I wouldn't exclude aces either. But more to the point, I don't think he's doing that as a bluff very often, if at all. So yeah. Where was I? I think the thing about the live play formats is that it often results in fairly varied commentary, but it's varied in a bad way as well as a good one, in that you'll rarely get a targeted discussion of a topic. You'll tend to get something as it comes up in a video in particular. Um, you might get a little bit of a theme throughout the video, but that can't really be desperately targeted, because naturally it depends on what spots arise, and unless it's literally a commentary over an essentially unrelated video, which I think is pretty useless. The commentary may as well be over a lecture. And playing at the same time is only going to distract the instructor, and if that's the case. But at the same time, personally, I find live play videos more fun to watch. I like that I get to see somebody else play through a session as per usual, in that there might be some things that they think too obvious to mention in their theory videos and their reviews, but they might come up in their live play videos, and of course that opens up the opportunity to ask questions, which of course you should if you don't understand anything that I don't mention, or even if you don't understand what I've been talking about. Don't feel the fact that I've mentioned it is a reason why you shouldn't ask questions about it. I mean, I think on this flop, in theory, it's tough for us to have a raising range because we rep about 5 value combos, well, about 15 value combos, but I expect most 25 zoom, not 25 zoom, 50 zoom players to be over bluffing that spot. Also, I don't expect them to really consider their range, or to know that we likely flat most of our value hands in that spot as well. Uh, I mean, I think this, with Jack 10 here, with the Jack of Spades, it would probably be a call, just because it's that little bit stronger, but the 10 of Spades obviously is less able to value better effectively on spade runouts. It's consequently not as good a bluff. So I think it's fine just to fold it. Though I would be conscious that you do have to defend extremely wide on paired boards. Everyone knows that nobody flops anything ever on paired boards, and that's why king high is often something you need to call. I mean, I expect this guy to show up with an ace a decent portion of the time, and there's no way in hell we can value bet this river. I just don't know what he's doing. But but again, of course, you can't be sorry for that because that's where your profit comes from. People doing completely inexplicable things. Because this guy seems positionally unaware, I think we can 3-bet this. Although my standard would be to flats Ace King on the button against under the gun. I mean, I think we probably have to make this a 2-street game. If we just overbet jam this flop, it's probably a bit iffy. This turn card is a bit awkward. I think, in theory, this is certainly a hand we should be checking back, just because it's close to the bottom of our potential value range, and also it protects pretty adequately, especially with spade. I think based on this guy's pre-flop stats, we can also assume this is going to be capable of bluffing missed spades on the river a decent portion of the time. So I think that's why we need to call this river. But yeah, I think shoving this turn is also a reasonable play. Although the top card paired on the turn, and that's normally fairly scary, because people tend to call a lot with top pair. I mean, we're not bothering with using a balanced bet size here because our opponent seems bad. The top card pairing is normally scary because people tend to call a lot with top pair. It's not so much when you're in a 3-bet pot on the top card, and the top card is something like a 10, because people tend not to call 3-bets pre with 10x as much. I mean, they might have some ace 10 in their range. A fish might have king 10, jack 10, queen 10, but they probably also have more. If they have those hands, they have lots of one spade Broadway hands as well, which obviously allows us to value bet extremely effectively. If the board were rainbow, I think the turn would be a fairly easy check back, just because you can't really get called by draws, and thus it's tough to get value from anything at all. So I think until recently I personally would have made the mistake of checking this flop against lots of players, but you've got to remember that very rarely do your opponents have Jack X. Furthermore, they often have 2 overcards to your hand, which is a hand with pretty decent equity. And so if they fold those, it's a very good result. And you can also get value from ace high, worse pocket pairs. So it's a fairly effective value bet. I think ace high is a much more feasible check, as is, say, on jack 4, ace 4 would be a pretty good check as well. Though you do have to be aware of the strength of your checking range in that spot. You probably have to call down with ace high a lot after checking back that flop for that reason. Six of series just a check fold. We're against none of the gun range, and we have basically no way to improve while all our opponent's bluffs have at least 6 outs against us. Have at least 9 outs against us, even because the 3 queens are also good. I'm interested to see what the big blind's cold calling 3-bet here with. Obviously wishing I'd called now, but that would simply be results oriented. Because it's quite rare to see cold calling of 3-bets in this spot. I know my old backer used to recommend, well, still does recommend, calling a wide variety of pocket pairs, for instance, in that spot. But I think that's a tough strategy to maintain. Wow, okay. In fact, I'm not going to take a note on that. He seems fairly reggish, so I'm going to assume that he just didn't see the 3-bet before clicking call. I'm just hanging around with 7-5 suited because with a couple of callers we can come along, maybe even with one caller. But although it's typically quite a good hand to 3-bet on that spot, it's not anything like sufficiently so that it forms part of a balanced range. And I think against a player who opens for a pot in middle position and seems slightly fishy over a limited sample, it's more likely that the correct adjustment is to bluff less rather than to bluff more. We're 3-betting slightly bigger than normal here because stacks are a bit deep. I mean, even $5 might have been good because of the 200 big blind stacks. I think this is probably just about a call. We need to be defending a decent amount of our range against a small blind open, especially a 2.5x as opposed to 3x. I'd recommend taking a look at the numbers. It actually changes pretty significantly the percentage of your range you need to defend. Against an overbet, I think we can just fold here. Against a large c-bet in particular, I think raising is almost certainly the best option. We'll be perceived to have a lot of draws in this spot. I'm slowly coming around to a school of thought which suggests that you should maximise your immediate EV with every hand rather than being concerned about balanced ranges and then account for whatever unbalance you might have displayed in later hands, although I think there are certainly flaws with that school of thoughts. Obviously we're barreling the turn, and I think if the draws miss, it's probably a good spot just to shove rivers for slightly more than pots. If the draws hit, we probably still have to shove the river, but we probably still have to bet the river, but it's probably going to be a bet fold. Because although we'll be getting like 6-1 on the call, people simply don't check raise bluffs there, and also to have bluffs on a river if the draw hits, he'd have to be turning very strong hands into a bluff. So here, I think, to be honest, I think we just have to shove. I think he's priced in with his draws. I don't see him having bluffs here, and I really don't know what he's doing. Doing that with queens, that is unbelievably awful. Well, okay, it's not that bad, in that we might continue with draws against that check raise, and so he is getting value in a way, but fundamentally what he's doing is trying to get value from a bluff catcher against a polarized range, which, I mean, just theoretically, it's pretty ridiculous. If we assume we're reasonably well balanced, obviously, if we have lots of bluffs or lots of semi-bluffs, then it becomes a lot more reasonable. But personally, I wouldn't assume that anybody is really that unbalanced, such as to make that a legitimate value bet. I think, based on discussions I've had with the guy marks in purple here, I think he might possibly be over-bluffing this spot a little bit, but I think, especially, I'm not sure if it's 4 or 5 way, I think ace queen is just too weak to defend here, when we need to be defending like 20% of our range. If that. And also it's another spot where a lot of his bluffs, they might actually be ahead of us. Like he can readily bluff 9-8 or 10-8 there. So, yeah. So basically it means that calling there, assuming we're good at all, is pretty suicidal. So I think this is just a check and hopes gets showdown. Turn becomes a little weird. I still don't think we could have called. When the Nissan on the bus and calls with flop bets. I think we're pretty much hoping he has a medium pair. And in this spot, I'm not really sure what he can be bluffing with. I don't think he's capable of turning 2s through 5s into a bluff here. And I think basically he doesn't raise anything else, which is now a bluff pre-flop. And so that's assuming his pre-flop range looks like some ace-x suited to some broadways and some pocket pairs and some suited connectors. Only really weak suited connectors there don't beat our hand. So like 7-6 suited and worse. And I don't think he has enough of those in his range to balance the times he has Queen X and might check the turn, or Jacks, which he might value bet the river with. Furthermore, his bet sizing is fundamentally just too big there for his range. Obviously, it's not great when the river counterfeits our hand. I think I plan to check raise his turn. I think we can probably value bet this river, because we do have some misdraws. We have King Jack, King 10, Jack 10, some hearts. So I do expect him to call with worse a decent percentage of the time. I mean, yeah. Okay, that's weird. Sorry about that. I'm not sure if I should take notes during my videos or just tag hands to record afterwards. But I think taking notes is a useful thing to see, because a lot of people's notes are really terrible. Either they show unrealistic inferences. I'm going to finish that thought in a minute, because I just want to talk about this hand. It's a spot where I think very few regs are adequately protecting their checking range, so I think we can just triple our entire range there. So yeah, taking notes is something that very few people do appropriately. Really, when you take a note, you want it either to be absolutely certain and accurate, or to include details of the relevant hand history. I mean, when he bets three-quarters pot, I think we can probably just fold this, because I expect him to probably have some sizing tells based on hand strength as a fish. Although that's not absolutely certain, it's almost certain that all his bluffs have decent accuracy against Ace King anyway. Against the min plus raise, of course, we're defending Queen 7 in the big blind. And he c-bets far too much. With the slightest hint of equity, I think raising that flop would be a very good idea. But really, I think Queen 7 off with absolutely nothing to draw to is a little bit too weak. Although it would probably be a profitable raise in a vacuum, I just think it's probably a spot where if we do start raising every flop against this guy, he's going to notice sooner rather than later, and so it negatively affects our long-term EV, as he notices our flop raise percentage in his HUD is 80. King 9 is a fairly obvious call. I mean, I'm tempted to appeal here with backdoor diamonds, and I think I will, because I expect us to have decent implied odds. Especially because on such a drawy board, I expect this guy to come along a fair amount. I mean, the turn there is fairly marginal, but I think it's okay. And when all the draws miss, I think we could just get away with bluffing small and folding out some ace-high flush draws. and also denying him the opportunity to bluff. I mean, I think the turn is probably a fold with Ace Jack here. If we do hit an 8, our hand is super face up. We don't really have any implied odds. A Jack is certainly a marginal hand on a 4 straight board, and and Ace and Jack outs might not be good for us anyway. So there's that. King Jack is a fairly good hand to squeeze here. We block kings and jacks, obviously Ace King. And also we don't really want to flash it, but it would play fairly well in the heads up 3-bet pots, because top pair certainly increase in value there. Though if this guy calls, is going to be an odd dynamic at play. I'm going to finish this video in a second. We've been running for 45 minutes, so I think I think I've talked about a decent amount of useful stuff here. Again, if you have any questions, as I mentioned at the start of the video, tell me what you want to see from my theory series, because there are so many topics I could be talking about. So it really is borderline ridiculous, and that's why it isn't coming out more quickly. I think the main thing is just that it's actually quite tough to decide what order things come in. Like for instance, I know that I want to do a brief introduction to game theory, but I'm not really sure what that should consist of. So although obviously it should be specific, it should be more specific to poker than anything else. Should I talk about how to start with GCO solutions and such as the pain of the video producer? Although I'm sure I'm sure I'm not really in a good place to complain. So thanks for that, guys. I've been a Definite Article. I hope you've enjoyed this, and good luck at the tables.